Hello, everyone, and welcome to our next episode of the Concussioners podcast. And today we are joined by one of my dear friends, Dr. Rachel Frontain. Hello, Rachel.
Hi.
Rachel comes to us from Calgary, Alberta, where she is the owner of a new chiropractic. And if you haven't checked out her Instagram, where she tours you through her stunningly gorgeous new clinic and all the cute puppies that are there as well, please go go look, because honestly, Rach, your clinic is absolutely beautiful.
Well, thank you.
And technically, you're still kind of new back to the Calgary space, aren't you?
Yeah.
Yeah. So can you highlight for our listeners, because I recommended you to everyone in the Calgary area,
Thank you.
but can you highlight for our listeners a little bit of your own journey through coming back to Calgary? Because I know you've done training in the US. I know you've worked in the functional neurology space. I know you are super passionate about multimodal care and your skill set is massively diverse. So could you take us a little bit on your journey and why you love working with the concussion and neurological population as much as you do?
Love those questions. So yeah, I came back to Calgary after going to school and practicing in Portland, Oregon for 6 years. And I came back 2021, pandemic stuff still going on. And my work visa was expiring and I was ready to come home. Although Calgary was not home. Calgary is a big, beautiful city by Canadian standards. Near the mountains with, lots of access to nature. And I had lots of family members here already. So those were kind of the main reasons why I wanted to come here, as well as I was used to food and things to do in a city after living in Portland, and Calgary offers those things and is still growing. So those were kind of my main drivers in coming back to Calgary. And along with the fact that it's really becoming a medical hub. There are tons of new practitioners here. There's cutting edge technology being designed and researched here that I had heard about before I came back. So I was put in touch with somebody who introduced me to the person who initially hired me for the multidisciplinary clinic. And he was doing a chronic pain clinic at the time and had tons of different practitioners, naturopaths, physio, massage, general practitioners. He himself was a pain management specialist, and he wanted to shift from chronic pain to concussion, which was really exciting for me and really exciting for him because he just saw concussion be the root cause of so many people's chronic pain. So that was kind of what brought me here, I guess, all of those things. And then I started working in that space and it was super great, like right out of the gate, such good reception, which was always the big question mark about coming back to Canada. And certainly I've had colleagues be like, you're kind of the canary in the coal mine. Nobody in Alberta, at least, has been really doing what I do, what we do, to the extent
Very true.
that we do it.
Yeah.
And getting good reception. And a lot of it is because it is out of pocket. And so everybody kind of has this stigma like, well, because you charge more than a standard chiropractor, you're not going to be busy. And
Right.
that's just not true.
Mhm.
It's just not true because people are sick and tired of being sick and tired, period. And you offer them an approach that is science-based. It explains so much of what they're going through, and you give them a way out of that or a way to recover from that, or you give them resources and other practitioners to join in on your journey together, and they're gung-ho. They're gung-ho. They're excited. We both run intensives where we see patients multiple times a day for multiple days in a row. And from starting in April of 2021, I had an intensive every single week.
Yeah.
That entire year. I actually didn't have any daily patients. I only had intensives because people just wanted the program that was going to get them 30% better in 5 days or 70%
It
better.
works
And it works.
so much, so much. Oh my gosh. So like, well, obviously, like we both love the intensive program because I was talking about this with another guest about, you're a chiropractor, I'm a physiotherapist. But when I look at the concussion space, I just look at concussion clinicians because truly, like the title behind our name doesn't matter.
If you understand them and you understand how to treat them, you're a concussion clinician.
Exactly. And when we look at the traditional approach to how people schedule, because it's the way it's always been, and this is like, to those listening, like Rach and I can sit and talk for hours about business, about neuro, about woo, about all the things that we typically do are like, just a quick question turns into a 4-hour text message conversation. But when you look at the traditional way that our clients get scheduled, even in the concussion space, it's an appointment a week or 1 or 2 appointments a week for weeks on end. And for me, the whole reason it shifted is because it wasn't working for me.
Yeah.
My clients weren't getting the outcome I wanted to get. I was getting frustrated because we weren't getting the outcomes I knew they were capable of.
Yeah.
And the intensive model, like you run it, I run it, so many of our colleagues run it because it works.
And we should probably touch on why. Like some of the reasons why it works is because your day-to-day life as a person living with a concussion or living with an injury is filled with so many variables. Like this is what I describe to patients who are like maybe on the fence about it or have kids and think about the fact that I'm going to have to find somebody to manage my kids. I'm like, let's just think about a day with your kids though. Like you come, you wake up with the kids, you get them ready for school. That's probably stressful. You get them off to school and then you have your day to yourself or you're working and you come in after all of those things that have maybe triggered your migraine or triggered your headache or trigger your dizziness. You come in for your 30-minute appointment. You feel marginally better because you're already like on the tipping point of having like a downward spiral for the rest of your day. And then you leave and maybe you feel better, but maybe you feel worse because it was like a bit too much. And then you go home and maybe you nap and then you're into like whatever activities the kids are going to when they get home from school. Or if somebody's in a bad mood, you're managing emotions, or your husband's in a bad mood, or you still have all that financial stress. Like there are so many variables.
Yeah.
Those all go away with the intensive. And in fact, it's very relaxing to come in and sit in a nook like Natasha's little rehab relaxation nook, or I have an intensive lounge area with like recliners and it's dark and it's quiet and it's peaceful and you get a break from all of that, which actually lets you get into that healing state that you need to be in so badly because you can't recover when you're in fight or flight. If you come in for a 30-minute daily appointment is what I call it, and we spend half of that just like calming you down, we're most likely not going to get to the laundry list of things that we know will get you better.
Well, and it's that piece. So I would say to my clients, it's like you get to kind of come into a little bubble.
Yeah.
And like you get to have this rehab bubble. And that exact same piece of like where you are the priority, you are the focus, and you don't have to worry about life. So exactly, those stressors get to melt away and you get to focus on you.
Yeah.
And I say, when we also look at this, and let's look at why an intensive works too, when we look at the concepts of neuroplasticity, we know dosage matters, we know intensity matters.
Yeah.
And so I always draw the graph, right? So I say like, say we do this treatment and like we get a little bit of improvement. But then if it were a typical traditional session, you're going to go home and the stressors and the life and all that is going to like dip down, like the gains. You might not lose it all,
right?
But you're going to lose some of it. And then you come again and you get a little bit higher. I said, so over a span of a week, you get, if you have the patient picturing a graph, you get like this much, people can be like an incy little bit, like say a centimeter of like, they move on the y-axis.
Yeah.
And then I'm like, but an intensive, because you're in this rehab bubble and you truly get to focus and we see you. So my intensives are 3 times a day.
Yep.
So I get to see you 3 times a day. I can not microscopic, but like small doses, mini challenge you more every session. And so you don't get that decline in the progress. We just get to keep layering and building in such small ways that you then continue to have this massive gain over a period of a week. I always say it's not a magic bullet.
Yeah.
It's not an instantaneous fix. Now, for some people, it's huge. And for some people, it's 30%.
Yeah.
And then for us, and I think you do this too, is we always follow up when they go home,
Yeah. Oh,
because when they go home, now life kicks back in. So it's
yeah.
like, yes, you go home with a home program. There is quite possibly a chance that we are going to have to adapt that home program because of the additional stressors you're now managing in life. And that is okay.
Yeah.
But you do it too. We talk about this all the time. Like the stories that our clients tell us of the things they're able to achieve and do, it warms your heart.
It does. It's what brings me back to this space all the time, which was the second part, I believe, of the question of why do I love working with concussion patients or people with chronic neurological disorders? Because I actually see a plethora of neurological conditions. I was just saying to Natasha, I had an early diagnosis of Parkinson's as a new patient at the end of my day today. I have a more recent concussion patient, but then I also have a stroke patient and severe traumatic brain injury patient who these patients always boggle my mind. I have had two of them where it's like they've been in a coma for weeks to months and they come out of that situation, like not really realizing what their limitations are,
Yeah.
and they have no pain. It's always just astounding to me, the no pain concept after that. But you get in and you look at their nervous system and there's a lot of work to do. And when they realize how it's almost like when you're talking to them, like lights are dim and no one's really home. But then you start working with them and they're like, oh, I went home and I felt so alert. I
Mhm.
felt so sharp. Like, that is cool. That is so fun. And like working with concussion patients, working with dizziness and vertigo patients, and getting the results that get them back to their life. It's just like, oh my gosh, to get people back to work, back to being contributing members in their family or in society, or get them off of medication reliance, get their questions answered.
Yeah.
People start to wonder what the hell they're doing here.
It's funny. So we just had, not funny because we run into this all the time, but we
Yeah.
just had a client here. This was amazing because she was 17 days post concussion and had gotten really crappy, straight up concussion advice. So she flew for an intensive on like day 25, which
That's early.
it is earlier than we would ever do an intensive normally.
Yeah.
However, she had had no rehab, had had terrible advice in rehab, had still been laying in bed doing nothing. And so, exactly. So I
My
was
jaw
like,
is wide open for those of you who
yeah.
didn't hear that.
And so we did a consult virtually first. And she said, she's like, I learned more from you in the hour just about understanding like what's actually happening in your brain. Like, what are you demonstrating? What does this mean? What does the recovery process look like? She's like, I learned more in the hour than she's had dealt with any of the providers she'd met with, which is why she came up.
Yeah.
But she was saying too, she was having some significant difficulties. And it was that awesome moment of, she's like, Natasha, she's like, my business partner could hear the switch in my voice on Wednesday.
Oh, I got goosebumps.
Right. And it's just like that.
Yeah.
Right? I just did a check in with her not too long ago, and she's doing phenomenal. She's like, I ran it. She's like, I did a 25K cycle, and I was like, oh my god, I can't even imagine.
I know. I've got a patient like that too who's been doing some good rehab, but like just like total space cadet when she is gone and she's been off of work, and her GP has been so supportive and she's had really supportive practitioners overall. And she's one of those patients who, like they've had a couple of concussions, which makes it harder to recover, first of all. And they've had a couple of concussions and she was off work and she was going to get there. Like she was slowly, incrementally having days where she was like, kind of symptom free. So then she goes and does everything that she would in a normal day. And then she's like,
Boom bust.
she's like, and I'm just like down and out for 2 days. Like, how am I supposed to go back to work? I'm like, okay, well, let's get you on. She is somebody who like started to have life just like coming at her as soon as she opened the floodgate of like returning to work and had a bunch of travel planned and, things that she wanted to still do despite having her concussion. And she was somebody that I saw twice a week for 2 weeks, maybe. And just dialed in home exercises and made them mostly video based and have a virtual follow-up scheduled with her. But even just doing those things, or like your awesome post today with
Oh, the coordination one?
the coordination one, giving her those kinds of activities totally stabilized her balance, totally stabilized like very poor vestibulospinal responses that she was having. And like she bounced in one day as opposed to like, hi, Tilly.
Mhm.
Hi, Dr. Rachel. She bounced in one day and she was like, my boyfriend is like, you're feeling better, aren't you? You know, like when
I love
people
that.
around them give them the
Yep.
feedback. And she's like, oh, yeah, I was on the tractor the other day and like I had 0 sound sensitivity. I didn't even think about it.
So good. It's one of the
Nice.
things that they're like, I feel this today. I feel like I'm going to vomit for the last week. Amazing.
Huge. I think
Right?
vomiting and nausea is worse
Oh,
than pain, but that's just
terrible.
me.
They're both terrible, but yes.
Both terrible.
So I always say, and I know we say this too, like I like to think when you come into work in the healthcare space, you're coming in because you want to help people, right? That's why you don't go into physiotherapy and chiropractic school to get rich. You go in because you have a heart and you're compassionate and you want to help people.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, in all of our healthcare systems, sometimes that leads to people getting jaded. Sometimes that leads to being forced to see too many people in an hour, which is why I love that we own our own businesses. But then it starts to equal subpar care.
Yeah.
And what I love about how we practice and what, as you know, like that I teach in the concussion nurse program, and that is our approach of, I always say multi-systems, multimodal.
Yeah.
When I talk about multi-systems, I'm talking about our vestib, our vision, our neck. When I talk about multimodal, I'm talking about the different like aspects of recovery. And so often I feel like when I see our clients come in, if we're not the first line of defense, because we're usually not, it's not that anyone's done a bad job, but it's that they've seen a provider that just does vestibular, or a provider that just does the neck, or just does the eyes. And it doesn't work for most people.
Nice.
I wish it's amazing right now.
I literally had this conversation in my head. I'm like, how am I going to say this if it comes up on the podcast?
Because it's coming up. Because it is the
Doesn't
root
work
of
for
what-
most people.
For most people. And it does work
For
some.
most injuries, because more than one system is usually injured when you have a brainstem level trauma, or when you have a cortical and brainstem trauma, or you have a neck and brainstem and cortical trauma. Like, you got to address them all. No system, I would say no system exists in a vacuum. So why would you treat it in a vacuum? Why would you only do vestibular rehab if they have oculomotor complaints? Why would you only do oculomotor rehab if they're struggling with dizziness and not look at their vestibular system? Because you can make the eyes work while the neck is still, but how often are we still? So oftentimes I don't see the patients who get better from vision therapy, period, right? Because it worked for them.
Exactly. Well, we don't see those people. Like those.
We don't see those people. We see the people that failed that.
Vestibular therapy worked for.
Yeah.
They don't come through our doors because they're better.
They're better.
We see the people that have. I've said too. Like there's a post I did. Like I've been clinician 40 something. Because they didn't give up.
Oh yeah.
Right. And so it's this whole like therapists also need to check their bias. So when someone says to you, I've seen 47 clinicians, your face isn't like, holy crap.
Yeah.
It's like instead flipping our mindset to be like, freaking kudos to you for knowing there's still hope and health and persevering and continuing to find a solution.
Yeah.
And that is where, like, when we're into this persistent stage, I'd say if you're moving into the persistent stage and you've tried traditional vestibular, because again, there's nothing wrong with it. It serves its place and it serves its purpose.
Yep.
Or you've done the isolated vision, or you've done, and it's not working, then that's when we need to find you someone who does the multi-systems approach. So for me, the multi-systems approach is the ability to be able to assess the various systems to understand what's working and what's not working well and how they're speaking to each other. And then in treatment, you have the ability to dance and layer the systems together so they can use each other to build up.
Is that where symphony comes from?
So symphony, it could.
Yes.
So symphony, when it started, total detour here. Symphony was symphony neurological rehabilitation when it started.
Yep.
And the metaphor is that the symphony is the coming together of musical instruments led by a conductor to create a fluid, beautiful piece of harmonious music.
Mm.
Your brain is your conductor.
Mm-hmm.
Your bones, your tendons, your ligaments are your muscles. And the movement you create is your symphony.
Oh, I love it.
So that's where symphony actually comes from.
Just as eloquent.
But it applies. I can use a symphony analogy in almost every aspect of my clinic.
Totally.
So when you think of multi-systems,
Yeah.
comes to your brain.
What I usually describe to patients is like, I'm going to look at the three major systems that your brain is using to tell you about where you are in space all of the time. And your visual system, your vestibular system, and your proprioceptive systems, or the feedback you're getting from your muscles and joints, as to where they are in space. And those systems come together at the level of the brain stem and then are orchestrated further by things like the cerebellum, the basal ganglia, and your cortex. And ideally, all of those systems are working optimally. And the goal of my examination is to figure out which ones aren't working optimally or which areas have been impacted by your injury or where the communication breakdown is starting. And then the rehabilitation is designed to stimulate those pathways that are connecting those areas together repetitively to enhance those pathways to the point where ideally you don't need the rehab. And I think the exciting piece about concussion that like nobody talks about is that you can heal your concussion. You can get to the point where you don't need exercises anymore to live your life. And I've got a lot of patients behind me. And like all of the BS slogans that come out of other practitioners' mouths, like this is how you are for forever. This is what
as
you
good
have
as you're
to
gonna
get
get.
to. Like they just don't understand your nervous system. They don't. And what I usually describe to patients an injury is I use like a highway analogy. I say, imagine your nervous system is 4 lanes and it's sending information to and from your brain. Your brain, I think Mark Heisig had a really great, simple video a little while ago where your brain is just a relay system. Sensory information comes in from these super important sensory systems, your eyes, vestibular system, which nobody talks about, your
Which
muscles.
is like mind-boggling. But anyways, keep going.
Yeah. Nobody knows what that is. They know what a cochlea is, but they don't know what the vestibular apparatus is. So you get sensory information coming into the brain processes, brain creates output to muscles for motor control. And we forget things like blood vessels have muscle in it, right? So people are like, oh, I have this like weird lightheadedness, but that's not something you can work on. I'm like, excuse?
Yes, we can.
Yes, we can. So imagine there's 4 lanes of highway sending information to your brain and then 4 lanes of highway leaving your brain to go to the rest of your body. Well, you have an injury and all of a sudden you've got 4 lanes down to 2 on one side. And now you've got this awful bottleneck. Well, more accidents usually happen at bottlenecks as people get road rage and are sick of waiting. And so that 2 lane shrinks down to 1.5, shrinks down to 1. And those are the patients that are not getting better with time. Those are the patients who try to go back to their daily activities and just continue to overdo it because unfortunately, when a neuron goes anaerobic and doesn't have enough oxygen, it dies. And I always say, I don't want you to think that there's a bunch of death going on inside your brain. I'm not trying to be doom and gloom here, but I'm trying to describe why you're not getting better. Because overstimulating yourself is actually taking, sure, a step forward in your endurance, but 5 steps back in what you can actually do in a day. And so what the goal of some of these other therapies, like habituation therapy, which is your standard vision therapy and vestibular rehab, habituation therapy is going to help try to build a detour over the highway. They're going to try to create new pathways so that your brain just gets used to the fact that your eyes skip over that one little area, or the fact that your neck is always going to tighten up over there, or the fact that your eyes are always going to be undershooting. So they're going to add in a little extra saccade because your brain is constantly trying to adapt. Well, those usually come with symptoms.
And I always say too, when people are like, why is it concussion number 3 did this when concussion number 1 and 2, I was fine. I'm like, it's quite probable that concussion number 1 and 2 created the compensation. They created the alternate pathway. They created the detour. Concussion number 3 stripped away the ability for you to do your detour, as well as now revealing again the actual root issue. So it's like the straw that broke the camel's back.
And gave you new injury. Like now you're having to do triple duty. It's not one injury that you're trying to adapt around. It's 2 previous injuries, their compensations plus new injury. That's why
it happens all the time, not rehabbing the actual initial injury to begin with. It's always that question of like, and why I think our history is so important too, is you have a series of concussions. Great. What did you do for rehab? Because I want to know if you actually rehabbed it.
Yeah.
Or did we just like let time take its course and you felt better? So we don't actually know, was it a bridge that was built or was there actual rehab that took place?
Yeah. And I think the cool stuff, like we both use technology. So we're going to see, and I definitely see both with my technology and with my exam, where the weaknesses still lie. And we can't say necessarily which concussion caused what unless we know mechanism of action and like directly correlates with like a blow to the left side of their head and their left vestibular system is off and they're whatever. But I always say like, it doesn't really matter because I'm just going to treat it all.
And that's that. And I'm treating who's in front of me today.
Yeah.
And so this is how you present at this moment. And this is what we're going to work on.
We do is rebuild the highway.
Beautiful. It's funny, in the concussion nerds curriculum, I actually have a picture of like a highway. It's a handout that they can give a client that it's like a highway, but then there's like a big accident in the middle and like it disrupts the flow of traffic and they have to that's actually a handout in my curriculum.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Did we talk about this?
We've never actually talked about this one.
That's hilarious.
I love it. So here's the other piece. We are probably just going to have to do like a 2-part podcast because I feel like you're just going to have to come back again because we could talk forever. But here's the other piece I love. So we have talked about the science right now.
Yeah.
And this podcast, I say right in the beginning, like this is where we blend science and like compassion and intuition, because I do not believe you can approach particularly persistent concussion from a straight up necessarily science approach. You can be the best technician in the world, but if you are working with a client who has been on this journey for years, there's likely medically induced trauma. It's not a previous trauma. There's the anxieties of life. If you cannot approach them from a humanistic perspective and make human connection, we forget, and I think practitioners forget how important that piece of the puzzle is. And you and I have had many conversations about this.
Yeah.
And so I would love to hear from your perspective, again, just from that, when we were starting to talk about multimodal, the approach of like compassion and connection and rapport, I guess technically it would be considered too, is when we're working with our client.
I think a lot of feedback that I get from my patients with their first appointment is like, I get to spend a week with you. That's exciting. I think I'll get better just from this.
Best feedback. You are exactly the same in person as you are on social media. That is such a compliment because it means the consistency of trust that you have just creates safety in my presence, which, as you and I know, calms the nervous system, improves the chance of healing and recovery.
Yeah. I think the other thing that I do, like besides being
your awesome self,
bubbly, Let's just call it buble, and creating optimism around their
Mhm.
recovery for them because oftentimes they can't do that themselves. Telling them that they're messed up in some way is actually not like you're messed up. It's
But you're
like,
validating the
wow,
reality of their situation.
yeah, you have a lot going on here. Like just telling
Mhm.
them they do. They know.
They
They do.
know.
That's why they're here. But instead of going to a GP, overwhelming them with a laundry list of symptoms, and then the GP is like trying to play whack-a-mole medicine and like map at least one of these symptoms off today with a medication, you can explain all of them. You can see that they're not doing well. And they're like usually concerned, like, is this actually like enough for me to feel this bad? It's like, yeah, when it's all going on. And
Mhm.
just one examination for 30 minutes made you feel bad. I can't imagine what you feel like at the end of a 16-hour day. Like, woof.
Mhm.
And validating their experience is huge. You and I both know that. Making patients not feel crazy. That's the number one thing I
Number
like
one
to
thing.
do.
I did a concussion talk at a conference, and it was not too long because you know the things that like irate my blood does not
Mm,
make any sense. What makes my blood boil is when I get someone who messaged me and says, Natasha, like I was just discharged because I was told this is as good as I'm gonna get. It's like if you want to like immediately like that is the sentence. And I was at a conference and I was speaking to a group of physiotherapists, and I just said, please do not ever let
mm.
the words, this is as good as you're going to get, come out of your mouth to a client. I said, when you say that to somebody, you've reached your ceiling,
And you have removed
all hope from that they have.
and how
And,
dare you?
and that's the other piece. I'm like, and who gives you the right to ever say that? Because healing happens from so many methods, whether it's the science, whether it's spirituality, whether it's mindset, whether it's environment. We know
Yeah.
who gives you the right to tell somebody that they're never going to heal further than this moment right now because you've said so.
And you better go take a solid look at what you are projecting
I love that
onto
addition.
your patient.
Right?
Because
And it's like,
just because you don't feel like you're enough or you're lost, I'm pointing at the camera, everybody. And I'm not somebody who gets in somebody's face.
but it's like,
Except,
that is the thing. And it strips all the hope away. And so I think what you do exceptionally well, what I do well, is really like our clients feel freaking heard
yeah.
for the first time in a long time. And when I talk to the concussion nerds and when I mentor and like when it's all about like creating an environment of safety and trust is your number one freaking priority. And the first way you do that is you listen and you validate the experience your client has had because it is their experience.
Yeah.
You can never dictate somebody else's experience ever.
2 ears, 1 mouth. Using that ratio.
Right. And it's just like, oh God, you and I could tangent about this forever. But
Yeah, you can't change the patient's experience. You can't pretend to know what is going on in that
Mhm.
patient's brain. And oftentimes, patients actually give you clues as to where you need to look, where you need to focus, and whether or not you are the practitioner for that patient. Like, patients will forever consider you a good practitioner if you can just refer them on to somebody who can help them.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Yes.
So, you can be the hero by instead of removing hope, hitting the Google and finding another practitioner in your area who might have experience treating what you're treating. And on top of that, you can network with somebody else and you can make a new friend, colleague. You can go shadow them. You can figure out what they're doing.
Mhm.
You can learn and get yourself out of your own little rehab bubble because we all need to do it.
100%.
I do it.
I do it.
You do it. Yeah. Because there is
Yeah.
always something more to learn. And if you, as a practitioner, think that you know everything, are you kidding me? sometimes patients have had to take detours in their healthcare to like, gosh, get the molecular age of their cells determined before they could respond to rehab because they were a 74-year-old person trapped in a 24-year-old's body. And they just
Mm.
simply did not feed themselves enough fuel or the right fuel or detox well enough or reduce inflammation well enough before they could respond adequately to treatment and actually hold that response to treatment. I didn't see that coming.
I'm not gonna lie, I wouldn't either. But this is where I think when as clinicians who, again, like we never stop learning, but we also like the more you know, the more you realize you don't know. Like that is,
Yes.
it's so cliche, but it's so true. But the more you educate yourself, at least in this space of what our colleagues, again, AKA, that's why we do multidisciplinary panel calls and nerds. But like the more we can understand what our colleagues do, how that's going to show up in our patient, and when referral is necessary, that makes us better clinicians.
Yeah.
And then better teams for our clients. And it's like, I remember I had this client who lovely woman, I was lost. Like, I was just like, this is not in my wheelhouse.
Yep.
And I referred her and I was fully transparent with her. And I was like, I would love to help you. I am not the person to help you, but here's my colleague. They do it. She still refers to us because again, we connected. We were the bridge to connect her with someone who did help her.
You're
and
a
the
good
respect for
practitioner.
that.
Yeah.
And the respect our clients have when we can say, this is not in my wheelhouse. Like this is now exceeding the skill set that I have, but I want to help you find someone to help you keep going.
You are a good clinician. Even just expedite a patient's process and do some of the work for them because so many of the patients that find us have had to dig and talk and connect and network and be on Facebook groups and their prayer groups, you know, like they are trying their darndest to find the right people.
Digging.
And it's exhausting. And you can be a practitioner who not only benefits from networking within the network of practitioners in your circle, but you can get a patient better faster or where they need to be faster. Like that patient, they will be eternally grateful. I had a patient who he's actually all over my social media. He was the one who had that crazy movement disorder.
Oh, yeah.
And then
I love watching your running.
Well, he was not done after me. In fact, he needed to go and get surgery. He needed to get C1 fused to C2. Like it was insane what he actually needed. But I got him motion imaging done that proved that that is what he needed because his family was like, we are so certain that this is what he needs.
Right.
I was like, okay. I can't remember if I did the research, but I reached out to the doctor. I got them in contact and like it went out of my hands from there. Turns out it was positive. Turns out he went to India and got the surgery done. And he sent me a note after about like how all of these symptoms that were still remaining for him, like just went away
because he had the cervical spine.
Because he had that surgery. And they're like, Rachel, you are still one of our guardian angels. And I was just like,
right? Like those are the stories, right? And it's like, I have a client who she went back, she shares too, and like she's back at life and doing amazing. But again, it was like, she got leaps and bounds better. But when she went back, it was like, no, like you still need some, like we connected her with a somatic therapist and another physical therapist to help with some like residual like hip pain and stuff. So she could actually go back to like more running. It's like, this is where my journey took you to this point.
Yeah.
And you're not done, but here's who we can connect you with to keep you going.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think acknowledging that and recognizing that that's part of what we should be doing is so important. Okay. We could literally talk for hours. So you're going to come back and we're going to do a part 2 because, and part 2, we're going to go into like the woo. We're going to go, I'm just going to say like part 2 is going to be like our woo conversation because it's fun.
It is fun. And we have that more often than not.
Yes, me too. For those who want to connect with you, my dear, how is the best way to do so?
Well, come find me on social media at A New Chiro Clinic on Instagram.
We'll also drop that in the show notes.
Yeah. A New Chiropractic on Facebook. I'm mostly active on Instagram. www.anewchiroclinic.com will take you to my website, and the contact forum there is the best way to get into my inbox for patient questions. I do phone consultations if you want to make sure we're the right fit before booking to come on down. And I would love to meet you if you're in the Calgary or Alberta or Saskatchewan or on like anywhere.
Anywhere.
Come on down. Come on up. I've had people come up from Montana.
Plane flight. We know that the goal of this podcast is for clinicians as well as individuals on a journey, because they are like mass detectives and like huge advocates for their own health.
Yes.
If you had to leave imparting words for our clinicians and our clients on journeys, what would those parting words be?
I also get very fired up about people who have the audacity to remove hope from a situation. So my parting words would be to never give up hope. There is always room for improvement, even if it's incremental. And if you're somebody who has been struggling for a long time and is deep in the trenches of suffering, there's a ton of improvement for you available. And don't give up hope and keep digging, even though it is exhausting. Please reach out to other practitioners like Natasha and myself who have done a lot of this work already and would be happy to connect you with somebody in your area if that's possible. Yeah.
Thank you for being my guest and for all of the heart and passion that you bring to this space. You are a leader here, and I admire you and look up to you as well. So we will do this again soon. We will continue this conversation. But until next time, friends, thank you for joining us. Rachel, thank you for being here. And we will see you or hear you. We will connect next week. That's today's episode. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you liked what you heard, give us a like, give us a share, give us a tag on Instagram, and please never hesitate to reach out. We love communicating and connecting with you. Until next week, my friends, have a marvelous day.